Okay, now on to topic, understanding funding. Here are some of the things which you have to understand. It is very tricky to get early stage funding. 90% of startups will neither receive an angel round nor venture capital investment. A reason for that is obvious. They do not have a strong financial history of financials, and which may be inserted in a standard business valuation framework. For example, discounted cash flows, etc., etc. You don't have that. So therefore, traditional investment sources can't assess you for risk. Therefore, you have to go to high risk investments. And that is only available from angels and venture capital funds who specialize in high risk investing and are startups' best hope. But it has to be worth their while for them to invest in you. And today's workshop, we will cover that. What is it that you will have to be careful about, or what is it that you'll have to deep dive into to make it worth their while and to make your relationship with the investor successful? The fundamentals, the foundations of creating a funding strategy. The other advantage you have with them is that they bring in their own network for you. They will give you connections to customers. They will give you connections to next round of funding. But I think before anything else, what must be clear in your mind is what is it that you want to personally achieve financially? Because very often entrepreneurs confuse. They look at Sachin Bansals of this world and they see they've become billionaires in their own right. And although Sachin Bansal has taken 15 years to become that billionaire, we forget those 15 years. And but very often personal wealth is what is driving you. Or you could be wanting to build a sustainable company. So the approach for both is very different. So your long-term goal must be very clear to you. What are you trying to do? Create wealth and exit. There is one particular strategy. Build a sustainable organization that you wish to continue to be part of. Totally different strategy. The first strategy will require you to build value as quickly as possible and keep devolving your equity. You may ultimately hold just 5%. 500 million, that's a lot of money. You're worth $25 million. And in rupee terms, it's a very, very sizable amount of money. Okay, moving on. The other thing that you have to, this is linked to devolution, and this is where a lot of startup entrepreneurs stumble. What is the extent of control you want to have on your company? The point is, if you're trying to build wealth and exit, your control will become minuscule. It will become very small. But if you're trying to build a sustainable company, then and which you continue to be part of and control it, then you have to have a very different approach. So you have to be a majority shareholder. Majority shareholder means that you must have, in order to have absolute control, 74.1% share with you. Because 26% share gives that shareholder to take you to court if they don't agree on a strategy with you. Or you could want controlling stakes, 51%. That gives you controlling stakes. Or managing the organization. So if you have 26% stake, you can then make sure that the rest of the board listens to you on strategy. And as a CEO, execution is in any case in your hand. But if you really are driving for wealth, then for ensuring that you continue to manage the organization, your achievement of milestones that you have committed to investors becomes extremely important. And investors will largely own the strategy. You can have your perspective, but if investors want a specific strategy implemented and you accept it, then you have to deliver on the milestones. So the two kinds of organizations which are very different. Building personal wealth and exit, very different approach. Building a sustainable organization, completely different approach. So you must be very clear. What is it that you want to achieve? What are the factors that will drive funding strategy? Let's have a quick look at that. How are you going to source and deploy your funds? Very critical. Very few entrepreneurs even think about this when they're thinking of starting the company. What is it that you wish to achieve in the long term? We spoke about it. What is the nature of your startup? You need to really deep dive into it, whether it is even a startup. What is it that early investors will worry about? How will you estimate the enterprise value of your startup, especially in initial days? If you don't have revenues, consistent revenues over a period of time, being able to assess your enterprise value accurately becomes very difficult. So we'll get into that also. How will you do that? And then how do you do valuation? What are the various options available to you? When should you raise funds? And what are the perils of devolution? Given based on what are your personal goals? You want to build wealth, or you want to build a sustainable organization which you are managing? Devolution strategy would have to be figured out. So the tool we have given you, we are going to give you at the end of this workshop, is going to help you do that. You can start figuring out how should you devolve and to whom and at what time using the tool. Case study we'll not cover in this because webinars we don't cover it. We cover it in a longer workshops which we used to do in an offline mode. Okay, so do you have a financial strategy? That's the first question we have to kind of address. And first-time entrepreneurs usually focus on building the product at the cost of adequate cash runway to achieve the valuation that he is wanting. And this is the biggest point of failure. You need to see business from a financial point of view first, and then from what is it that you will build. So therefore, it is important to create the right funding plan with milestones clearly defined and with conservative timelines. Don't make aggressive timelines, because I can assure you even conservative timelines will be challenged because there are so many things you would not know and you would have to deal with them as you experience them. You need to have a really strong operations plan in place, and you need to prepare that well, and you need to execute on that very well, because that is what will get you funded. And your focus should be to be operationally profitable as quickly as possible. So operational profitability means that you're paying for your day-to-day expenses. You don't need money to run your company. And then the third thing you have to keep in mind is ensure that you have adequate runway that provides for all the surprises along the way, which will help you meet your milestones. So milestones become extremely important part of your funding strategy. So the intrinsic worthwhileness of business and the milestones that you are saying you will achieve in order to make it successful. Two most important factors. The next question you'll have to answer is, what do you need funds for? And what do you deploy it on? So you need funds for setting up a company, or you need it for proof of concept. Your best source of fund is you, your friends, your family. Nobody's going to give you money for this. You'll be very lucky if you can raise money at this stage. And unless you have a history of success, you have set up successful startups, you exited, then the investors will talk to you because they know you, that you have succeeded, and they will trust you. The next stage for you really is product development. You want to build the product now. You've done your POC, you got some initial customers, you want to build the product. This is the time you'll start looking for an angel investor. He could be an HNI, he could be a regular angel investor, which is actually set up as an entity, corporate entity. And then for operations, here's the interesting thing. Most startups miss this point, that you can go to a bank for operations. You should not raise growth capital, which will come from a VC or an angel investor, for operations. And we have helped multiple startups to raise bank funds. In fact, one case, Agua, which is into agri-fintech actually. In his initial years, about 2.5 years ago, when he got involved, got into coaching with us, we guided him and he raised 25 crores worth of debt from banks and carried out transactions using that money. Basically, we helped him set up a bill discounting facility. So you can raise bank funds for operations. It is possible for SMEs and startups. There is funds available. It could be anything from 10 lakh to 1 crore. And then growth, because for non-linear growth, where growth you really want to achieve a growth that skyrockets, you need venture capital. So you must distinguish between money required for operations and money required for growth. These are two different reasons for borrowing money. Let's spend a little time in understanding how does a conventional business finance itself at different stages, and then compare it to a startup so that we understand what is the difference. So conventional business is a role model to follow. Banks understand it, right? And if you see, I have got in the yellow part, you see CapEx, which means capital expenditure. On the green, on your right-hand side, you see OpEx, which is operating expenditure. And these are the type of fundraise you can do: equity, loan, grants, or you can generate cash from operations from your business. And these are the stages of your business: setup, break even, regular operations, and growth, profitable operations and growth. So typically in a conventional business, setup could be bootstrap, convertible notes. For CapEx, it could even be raising what we call medium-term loans from banks or from private lenders. Possible. If you're a social enterprise, you can actually go to trusts. For operations, you're still setting up, so there's no profit coming in. For operations, again, your own money. You can take bank limits also if you have started your production. I will not be devoting time on grants because it's a social sector enterprise and we get very few people who actually are doing social sector work and are participating in our workshops. The next thing is break even. Again, here the sources of funds don't change. They're pretty much same as setup. For operations, you're not going to get medium-term loan because that is for buying capital equipment for your computers, for your office furniture, for your vehicles, etc., etc. But because you're already operating, you can generate what we call free cash flow. That is cash which is getting generated in addition to what you're spending, which you can deploy back into business. This is what a good businessman does. He tries to aim as quickly as possible for generating cash and redeploying it into his business. Your normal growth will come from free cash. Growth. Now, for growth, it changes. The entrepreneur can put his own money, he can go to private equity, depending on his size, he can go to IPO, he can do all kinds of stuff. And because he's growing now, he might need another tranche of medium-term loan from banks. For operations, again, sell for private equity, banks, banks give you operating limits and banks give you operating limits and for example, for funding your raw material purchase, you get a limit. For funding your sales side of business, customers want a credit, you can get bill discounting. So there are various options available to you, which you can use. Let's see how it compares to startups. What's different? So there are 3 stages which come in addition for startups: ideation, product market fit, and you see it marked out here, and discover business model. This is what is actually additional work for setting up a business for a startup. And you can truly say that once these 3 things have happened, then the regular business setup starts. And till this hasn't happened, you really don't have a business. And this is how your funding will happen at this stage. Initially, it's going to be bootstrap. Ideation, you're not going to get money. If some private lender is kind enough to give you money, great. Figure out whether you want to borrow money and give out stake at that point in time. Even if you have to take it on interest, take a debt. Don't give equity. Then product market fit. Again, bootstrap. You might get angel funding at this stage, but very difficult to get it. You'll spend a lot of time talking to angel investors, convincing them that yes, you have a great opportunity. Our advice is create a runway, financial runway through your own funds, friends and family, or maybe crowdfunding, which gives you sufficient runway to reach a stage where product market fit is established and then raise, or product market fit has reached a very mature stage and then raise angel funds. Discovering business model. Our advice is bootstrap, but if you're at this stage, you will get funding, especially if your business looks very attractive. Rest is almost exactly like a regular business. And what you really need to do is figure out what will you take from banks and what will you take from growth capital. So operational break-even achieved, you want to now build the organization till such time you are ready for venture capital. Seed capital is available. Typically 9 months to 12 months is the period. So that VCs can see that yes, you're a stable growing company. What you need to do is press the accelerator, and you need a lot of gas for that. That's when VC comes in. So it becomes extremely important, therefore, to understand what is a startup and how is it different from a regular business, so that you can test your own business idea for that qualification. That does my business really qualify as a startup? Because if it does not qualify as a startup, it's a regular business, go to banks and get funded, and you will get funded. Because somebody is already doing that business somewhere and there is a role model. So as per Ministry of Commerce, the way it's been defined is that it's an entity which is not older than 5 years from the date of incorporation, has turnover not exceeding 25 crores in last 5 financial years. And this is where the real definition comes, is innovating, developing, deploying, and commercializing new products, processes, or services driven by technology or intellectual property. I think the word innovating is extremely important here. What it really means is that nobody has done this before. This is whatever you're doing is new. And because it is new, nobody has done it before. Therefore, you have to develop the solution. And after you develop it, the whole product market fit piece, you have to start deploying it so that people start using it. So innovate, develop, deploy covers your entire journey from the time you have an idea till you start achieving a product market fit. And commercializing, which is your business model discovery. So ideation, prototyping, building product, and deploying it to customers, and then finally commercializing it, making money out of it, and using regular processes to run your business. This is the most important definition that you must be completely focused on. And whatever you are doing, it could be driven by technology or intellectual property. If you're building app or any special platform, that's technology for you. You don't have to be designing the new electric car to be technology driven. So there can be fundamental technology and there can be applied technology. This is what we have added to the definition. It could also be opening new geographies or customer segments. And enough example, Amazon started selling books in US, Flipkart started selling books in India. Same concept, same processes, different geography and customers. Flipkart got into e-commerce in tier 1 towns, cities. Meesho got into e-commerce in tier 2, tier 3 towns. Same concept, different geography, different customer. So therefore, the critical question to answer to establish whether you really have a great value to offer, what will you be innovating? If you don't have an answer to that question, please start finding that answer. Is it going to be a product or a service? Is it a prevailing business model? Is it a business process? Or revenue model? What are you going to innovate? And remember, innovate means that nobody has done this in this manner ever before. You are the first one to do this. So if you're not innovating in any one of these areas, and you're simply going to do something that's already being done, you may not be seen as a startup. So be careful about that. What will it be driven by? New technology or intellectual property? Must have clarity. Are you going to go into a new market or a new customer segment or a new geography? So maybe somebody's already done that product or service in tier 1 town, but you go take it to tier 2, tier 3 towns, you take it to rural India. It is still a startup because the nature of problem will change. Customer expectations will change. Customer's price point will change. It becomes a different business. But at all stages, these 5 areas you must address. And here again, we find that entrepreneurs really don't do a good job. What's your business strategy? What's your financial strategy? What's your go-to-market strategy, revenue model, business model? These things need to be thought of from day one. And these are all framework driven. It's not difficult, because the fact that you've not done it before, it makes it a bit difficult. But there are frameworks existing for all these 5 activities. And based on this, if you do this well, you'll be able to create a really robust business plan. This is a given. You must start doing this from day one. You've never done this before. You need to practice how to do these things. Okay, moving on. So how will you be different? So we are talking about innovation. So the question that we must answer is, okay, what does it really mean? So the question you have to ask is, will your idea truly disrupt the market? That means, will you be doing things in a manner which will change our behavior, our customers' behavior? Example, Redbus. Redbus changed how you booked bus tickets. So people stopped going to agents as often and started booking tickets online. Ubers and Olas and Lyfts of this world changed how you booked cabs and changed who was the cab driver. And our method of finding transport changed. Our behavior changed. We started looking for cabs in a very different manner. This is what really disruption means. You disrupt the way things are happening. Or you could be just doing sustainable improvement. And sustainable improvement means, so for example, so let's say Ola has Ola has started introducing what I am going to say, but as an example. So let us say Uber does not have electric vehicles deployed in India, but you create a pool of electric cabs, which, ecologically conscious people, environmentally conscious people would love to use. So you've done a market segmentation and you created an improvement which will service that market segmentation. But it's not a disruption in that sense. It is, you've done an improvement where it will sustain a competitive advantage up to some time, till other competitors also start doing the same thing. It may take them time to procure those electric cars, but within 1 year, 1.5 years, they'll start competing with you. So the other thing you should remember is that there is no permanent competitive moat in today's world. Whatever you're doing, somebody will, if it's successful, somebody will copy. Therefore, constant innovation is a must. Till you really become huge, you have huge momentum, and you can then sustain. But even then, constant innovation is constantly required. Look at Flipkarts, Amazons of this world. Look at Paytms of this world. They're constantly innovating. There is no choice. Or you could just be driving efficiency in an existing market. Very unlikely that this will get funded. You're just improving the time or speed at which something is getting done. It may not be sustainable competitive differentiation. And your ability to attract customers also may not be really very strong in this case. So clarity about what are you going to be doing becomes extremely important, because you could think, you're changing the world, and the investor will say, you know what, I have seen 10 other companies do this. And therefore, being very objective, being very down to earth, and really truly critically assessing what you're trying to do becomes extremely important. So in Bulletproof Your Startup, we have a very different definition for startups. And that definition really, just to give you an example, today, if you tell your friends, hey, I'm doing a startup, they look up at you with respect, as if, you're the next Bollywood hero. They see a future Sachin Bansal in you. But try this for a change. Start calling whatever your startup a business with an uncertain future. 95% startups fail. And try and tell your friends that I am going to set up a business with uncertain future, they're probably going to start wondering, what are you smoking? But this perspective is extremely important for you. You're setting up a business with uncertain future for addressing a problem customer is facing. We still don't know what product will solve that problem. But you identified a problem the customer is facing. And he's trying to do some job. Problems don't exist in isolation. They occur because we try to do something. So in a job, a customer is attempting to perform or wants to perform. I want to get from point A to point B in a shortest possible time. It's a job. I'm going to look for a cab that is easily available and comes quickly. That's a product. But it's a consequence of a problem being solved in a manner no one has addressed earlier. This is extremely important. This is the disruption part. Based on a set of hypotheses about how to address them. You have a set of hypotheses. They are not truths. You have to prove those hypotheses are correct through your initial experimentation, POCs, talking to customer, the customer development stage. And if problems are addressed successfully within a defined business model, commercializing, remember? Commercializing. It should have a possibility of, this is what the government definition is missed, and this is what gets you funding. It should have a possibility of generating humongous future profits. Without this, valuation does not happen. It's not current profits. It is that possibility that one day you're going to make crazy profits. And that is what one investor keeps selling to the next investor. And that comes from the kind of growth metrics your enterprise is showing. So metrics become very important there. So this is how we define startups. This is your definition framework. You can actually apply this to yourself and check yourself for whether you truly are a fundable startup. You may get funding, but you might get moderate degree of funding if this is not true. So zeroth law of funding strategy. This is the basic given. Who will invest in the venture? It starts with founders. I have got so many founders who come with ideas and say, you know what, can you help us find investor? Why would somebody invest in your idea? There are 7 billion humans on the earth, and I'm sure at least 1 billion are capable of thinking like you. And if you can guarantee me that none of those 1 billion will get this idea except you, then maybe funding can happen. But it's not the idea that matters. It's the execution that's the most important part. Can you execute well? You can have a lousy idea, but if you execute well, you'll get funded. Then friends and relatives, then banks, then incubators and accelerators. Don't try to jump straight off to angel investors and VCs. Look for these 4 first, then seed funds, angels or VCs. There are government schemes available where you can apply for funding. A lot of money getting invested in agri-techs. Agua just picked up, I think, 25 lakhs from one of the government schemes. Government is also doing a lot of investment in other sectors. I think in biotech, they're doing a lot. So there are different schemes government has set up. You can track that. Here's the key. So we have had situations where founders often leave startups midway, go abroad for higher studies, get simply bored or can't do the grind. It's tough work. So every investor will try to see whether you have skin in the game. If you don't have skin in the game, you will not get funded. And what is skin in the game? Are you emotionally and financially invested in the venture? Are you giving up your life for it? If an investor doesn't see that, he's not going to invest. So this is the 0th law of funding strategy. You have to apply this to yourself first. If you do not have 100% emotional commitment, if you do not have 100% physical and intellectual commitment, and you are not financially invested, back off. You're not going to get funded. Is there a question? Okay.
No.
Is there a question?
No, there's no question, sir.
Okay. So I will stop at 11 and ask you for questions.
Yes.
4 key milestones. So milestones form the basis of your funding strategy. And the picture that you see, faded picture that you see, is that 5 Kazims framework that I mentioned earlier. So what are the 4 key milestones which form the basis of your funding strategy at different stages? If this is your roadway, if this is the runway that you're going to create, the first milestone is idea could actually be a business opportunity. Have you proven that it's a business opportunity? And I will get into details of that. What will prove that it's a business opportunity? The second milestone is, have you achieved product market fit? The third is, do you have a repeatable, scalable business model discovered? Is the business scaling happening? Is the final milestone. But these are very high level milestones. Each of these milestones can have sub milestones, which can help you get funding. So we'll go a little deeper into what those milestones are. Above all, to begin with, what is the purpose of your business? If you remember, the first thing I shared with you was, what is the purpose of my business? Why are we doing Bulletproof Your Startup? It gives you absolute clarity that this is why these people are doing this. Without this, it will be very difficult for you to communicate to the investor, why are you doing what you're doing? And invariably, if you start your conversation with the product, it will be very difficult for him to understand what is the purpose for which your business is set up. How do you find the purpose? Let's get into that. You remember I mentioned the JTBD framework, jobs to be done framework. So what is the job for which the customer will hire your feature, product, solution? This, you must be absolutely clear about this. This is your purpose. This is defining why you do what you do. And the job could be of any one of these 3 types. It could be a functional job. It could be an emotional job. It could be a social job. This defines the basic needs. Why is the customer what is the customer wanting to do? And the why will come from understanding of what is the nature of the job. So let's take an example. This is a college student who he's just passed his MBA or a BTech program, and now he's going to be hired by, he's lucky he got a job with McKinsey and Company. And McKinsey tells him that, you know what, on the joining date, we would expect you to wear a suit, at least a jacket and a tie. And let us say the student has never worn a jacket and a tie in his life. Now he has to go quickly buy a jacket and a tie. Do you think he's going to buy the most expensive, fancy looking jacket and tie? No, he's not. He's going to buy what is functionally necessary. He's going to be very conscious of what money he spends. Okay, so he buys the jacket and tie and he gets into McKinsey and he meets a really interesting, he or she meets a very interesting person from opposite sex and wants to date. And this is going to be his first date. He wants to take her out. Chances are he's going to want to buy something good. He's going to make himself look good. It's no longer a functional job. It's now an emotional job. And his proclivity to pay a higher price and look at a little more flamboyant designs is going to increase. So see what happened. It's the same purchase of a garment, but the behavior is going to be very different because the underlying nature of job is very different. And let's say this relationship prospers, it becomes really very deep and they decide to get married to each other. And now he has to buy clothes for his marriage. He or she have to buy clothes for their marriage. Now it's no longer the date situation. It's now a social come emotional job. He wants to be presentable to a larger group of people, to the whole society which will participate in his marriage. The nature of job again changed. His purse strings will be a little more open. He will look for really fancy dress to wear. Same, if you see it from distance, you would say the job is same. He's buying a garment, but not really. The underlying job could be functional, could be emotional, could be social. And therefore, the way you will market it to him, the way you'll position it to him will change. So when you look at a job, you also then need to see what is the nature of need, underlying need. If you notice, all three will have different needs. Functional job, emotional job, and social job will have a different need. So let's look at the need analysis. How does need analysis work? What you see here is what we call a blatant critical matrix. And the blatant critical matrix really has problem visibility on the vertical dimension and customer need on the horizontal dimension. The need could be aspirational or could be critical. So the first case that I gave you, where he has to buy a jacket and a tie to join the job, becomes critical. And it is blatant. Problem is visible, it's in his face. They will not let him join if he doesn't wear that. So blatant critical problems are very obvious, they're there, and these are ideal problems to solve because you'll get quick conversions. But it'll also be highly competitive because everybody else can see it. Now, when he wanted to go on date, the business changed. It became blatant aspirational. It could have been latent aspirational also, but we will go to that in the next case. When he's getting married, now to give people, to make it whole, the entire thing memorable, it becomes latent aspirational, and it's somewhere in between. But the latency of the real desire that he has becomes critical because you can bring that out. So for example, if you launch a new set of achkans, which are a completely different design, which will be unique, and anybody who's getting married in the next 3 months would want to wear it. Latent aspirational, need to look different. So understanding these parts, these things are extremely important. But the real opportunity lies in latent critical. This is where the huge opportunities are, really huge opportunities. So if you can identify a business opportunity where the job that the customer is trying to do is across a large segment of customers, and it's a latent critical and underlying need is latent critical, you're onto a good thing. And the third level of analysis, which actually what I'm sharing with you is the analysis which we do in our coaching. So we'll first do customer jobs analysis, then we'll do need analysis, and then we do what we call problem analysis, nature of problem analysis. So problems can be of four kinds: unworkable, unavoidable, urgent, or underserved. Unworkable problem is broken business processes, manual processes, tax returns. Unavoidable is tax returns. You have to pay someday. Let's take an example of unworkable. Let's say you have a critical project going on at office. You have a car which you usually travel on, and you also have a bike. Unfortunately, you were playing badminton. Fortunately, you were playing badminton, and unfortunately, you strained your thigh, and you can't drive any longer. But you can still ride your bike. So problem is you need to solve it, but you can still postpone it, right? So it is falling in this urgent category. You can karna hai, but you can postpone. So what happens after you drive bike for a few days, you realize, no, the problem has become worse, and you can't now drive any of your vehicles. It's becoming unavoidable. But you say, okay, you know what, I'll take a cab because I can't afford to go to a doctor right now and undergo treatment. And then you find even getting into, after a few days, and even going down, getting into cabs is becoming impossible. It's become unworkable. There is nothing you can do anymore. You have to solve it. So this is what you need to figure out. Figure out the job to be done, figure out the underlying need, figure out the problem to be solved. And you will have such a sharp idea of whether you have a big opportunity or not. And then to be able to communicate this to the funder would become that much more easier for you. So next thing, let's say all this has happened. Now you have to figure out, okay, how big is the market? So you have this whole total addressable market calculation you do. And what most entrepreneurs miss out is that this is not really your market. Yeah, this is a complete opportunity for all the players who are there in this business. But really what you have to see is what is your serviceable and addressable market? How much can you really actually reach if you had the resources? And even that is not your immediate market. You'll therefore take a smaller chunk. You'll say, okay, my target market for the moment is this. So maybe you can, what you're doing is can be delivered across Karnataka. but you're in Bangalore. You say, okay, you know what? I understand Karnataka is my serviceable, addressable market, but my target market is going to be Bangalore. And even there's no guarantee that you'll achieve your target market on day one. So you have a share of market. Unfortunately, what happens, entrepreneur, when he's thinking about getting funded, his eyes are on TAM. He sees such a huge opportunity and he says, you know what, this is a fantastic opportunity, and he tries to sell TAM to investors. Investors don't buy into TAM. It is good that you have thought about it, but that's where it ends. The investor is really looking at what is your current share of market. If it's B2C, he's looking at how many users. If it is B2B, he's seeing what is the revenue. The next thing he's going to see, okay, what are the timelines you will take to capture your entire target market? So these views are very different. You need to align them. If you really, in a sound funding strategy, you would align these two. You will also focus on your current share of market and how are you going to grow to capture your target market. Those are your milestones. Those are your growth milestones. And if you can demonstrate that you're meeting those growth milestones, you will get funded. Because all that an investor wants to do is see that you can actually carry out the execution plan that you had shared with him. So, so you need to now start thinking about what is the business viability and what is the size of opportunity. This is the most important gate for getting funded. How do you figure out business viability? So, however attractive it might look to you, but the investor is actually going to be thinking, is this company worth taking a bet on? And here is what he's going to look for. Are you creating a compelling breakthrough opportunity? Disruptive innovation, disruptive business model, defensible technology. We covered this, and I'm now summing it up for you. Are you going to pick up a big fight? How big is the market? How big is your target market? How big is your serviceable addressable market? What is your current share? What is the speed at which you're capturing the market? These start becoming very important aspects to evaluate whether your business is really a viable and investable business. And keep in mind, it'll take you same amount of effort whether it's a small fight or a big fight. So choose to pick a big fight. That's where future humongous profits are going to come from. Are you creating a sticky, large community? Doesn't matter whether you're B2C, B2B. Are you getting references? Are you getting repeat orders? Are you getting more and more users who continue to use your platform or your product? These three things will define whether your business is worth betting on. And therefore, you must have, for items 2 and 3, for one, you have to have enough research done to show the investor that, hey, nobody else is doing this, I'm disrupting. And for the other two, your growth metrics have to be in place to convince the investor that yes, it's a big fight and you have a sticky community. So creating a differentiated opportunity becomes the key to this. And it's very important to see, if this is true, then it is very important to see how will the risk and evaluation change over time. I'm actually going to stop here and throw it open for questions if there are any questions. So that.
There are two questions on the on my private chat. The first is coming from Saurav. Saurav, your question was in the Indian context, is Jugaad being done too much at the cheapest price? Is that a bit too much of happening?
A very interesting question, Saurav. So I think we are getting carried away with this whole, the whole hoopla around unicorns and Sachin Bansal and how people have become extremely rich. These lucky strikes have always happened. This is not a new phenomena. If you see SMEs and other companies, there are companies who suddenly become very big because they did something well. They were there at the right time and they did it well, they executed well, and they became big. Many stories out there. But in terms of percentages, I think that percentage is going to be below 1 or 2%. It's not a very large percentage. So therefore, we try to figure out, quick fire way of getting a lot of money up front. And we try to figure out, something that will drive immediate attraction and raise a lot of money. But a lot of companies just fizzle out, even after raising money. The best example is there was a company called Peppertap. I think it shut down finally in 2012 or 13. Raised $40 million, could have been a Flipkart or a Myntra, but could not execute. Just couldn't execute. Could not deal with how to grow. Just shut down. So, so building a thriving business is not an easy task, and it's not going to happen out of jugaad. Can you strike lucky through jugaad? Sure, but that percentage is going to be really very small, 0.5%, 1%. If you want to bet your luck on that 1%, I would not. So Saurav, that is how I would answer this. I mean, setting up a business is a very, very, how should I put it? It can be a very structured exercise. And there's a lot of hard work and planning that needs to go into it. So it's like, I don't know how many of you have had experience of building, let's say, a house. Let's say you decide to build a 2-story home for yourself. You can't just say, kal se I'll start making this house. You have no clue about materials, about design, about dimensions, about how the construction happens, what should be the mix of cement, sandstone, and in making a wall, what kind of wood will be used for what kind of doors and windows. You have no clue. And business is just as complex. There are so many components, so many moving parts you have to think about and figure out. And you have no clue about it. Can it be done? Sure, yes. Provided you are organized, you are careful, you have very, very reasonable milestones, sure, you can set up a business and you'll be successful. So my advice to you, jugaad can work, very low probability, therefore don't take risk. Do something which is well thought through and is very carefully planned and executed. Saurav, I hope that answers your question.
Saurav is still on mute. The second question is from Pratap. Pratap says, Pratap, you're there, right? Yeah, I can see you. For approaching banks for funding operations, should we be in a revenue generating model, or shall we get funded based on the director's personal financial track record?
It's not going to be on director's personal financial track record, but let's take some specific examples. Let's say you're delivering a service or a product to marquee brands. And bank will happily give you bill discount, and those marquee brands ask you for 90 days credit or 60 days credit. You can discount that with banks. So for example, if some Tata company is your customer and you need, and Tata company wants a 30-day credit. It's very interesting, Pratap, we do a workshop on financial strategy also, which is different from funding strategy. And we go into deep explanation of how do you plan these things. And I'm just going to take a quick example. So let us say you're making a product and your raw material cost is 50%. And your cost of building that, including your running operations cost, are 30%. You have 20% gross margin. And you're only selling to marquee brands. So a bank will give you 80% bill discounting amount. So suppose you bill for 10 lakhs, it will give you 8 lakhs immediately against the bill. So you got your entire cost recovered from bill discounting. And guess what? You go back to your vendors and you say, you know what, you're going to give me, I'm going to look for 60 days credit. Let us say customer is wanting 30 days and you are asking for 60 days credit from your vendors. So you got 100% of bill value coming from them. You will have cash surplus. A simple plan, financial plan like this can generate cash surplus for you, and you can be working on other people's money. So it's all about how do you structure your business, financially structure your operations and plan your business. So you can get, even if a supplier is not ready to give you credit, bank will discount, it's called CC, cash credit. Bank will finance your inventory. All this is doable. You can get 10 lakh rupees of clean overdraft if that's what you need. See, most startups find it arduous to follow up with banks, to find the right bank, to continue building a relationship. It'll take you 2-3 months. But if you work with, let's say, SIDBI for 2-3 months, there's a very high likelihood that your operations funding can happen. If you're going to be buying computers and stuff like that for your office, they'll fund that because they have an asset to hold on to. Or you can go to leasing companies and lease computers. It totally depends on how you create your financial plan. I hope that answers your question, Pratap.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other question?
Yeah, there are 3 more questions. The next is from Rahul. How do you get into a fight with a big player who already owns a big share of a market?
Rahul, just hold on. I'll be going there.
Next is Rakesh Malhotra. TAM or SAM is important to reflect scalability, which is also as important as target market, especially when we are picking up big fight. So the question is, what are the reasonable time frame for target market revenue and then graduate to SAM?
Okay, very good question, Rakesh. And Rakesh, guys, Rakesh is, if I'm not mistaken, is actually in the US and he's awake at this point in time. Hats off to you, Rakesh. And we're truly honored that somebody is staying awake to listen to us at such an odd time in the night. And so here's the thing. See, at the customer development stage, if you see the image, you see customer dev stage here, right? Idea to opportunity, customer dev stage. You can keep singing the TAM song as much as you want. Nobody's going to believe you. They will start believing your share of the market at the product go-to-market fit stage. Okay, he seems to have got a decent share of the market at this stage. When they will really start believing TAM and SAM is when you have discovered your business model. Because you would have revenue streams in place, you have systems and processes in place, you have a very clear value proposition in place. This is when it starts becoming believable because your revenue lines, your revenue streams will show a certain growth pattern. And also the kind of, what is the revenue stream structure? How much is first time sale? How much is resell? How much is upsell? Those things start mattering. So SAM will start becoming relevant at this stage. TAM starts getting relevant at the growth stage. Because this is when you will have to do very smart market segmentation, figure out different segments, how are they responding, who will respond to what. And you could even get into acquisition strategy to address different parts of it, because something might be missing in your product or in the geographies you cover. You get into acquisition and merger mode here, where you start grabbing more and more of the market share. This is how probably it will happen, Rakesh, but it will be very specific to each startup. As somebody needs to be on mute.
Yes, sir. It's me, Gautam. Am I audible, sir?
I can hear you, but I can also hear somebody who I should not be hearing. Yeah, okay.
Oh my God.
But just let me confirm, Rakesh, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Ravi. Thank you so much.
Okay. Gautam.
Gautam, you can come in, please. Gautam?
I think it was Gautam's.
Yeah, Gautam. Yeah, Gautam.
Sir, if it's too noisy, I'll just chat, sir. I am in a restaurant right now. I'll
Go
just
ahead.
chat, sir.
With the question.
So, actually, what my question was that in the previous space we had discussed about what should the purpose regarding the business be. So recently, when I spoke with a mentor of mine, what he asked me, the question was that why am I doing this startup? So what my answer was that I found a gap in this market, and I want to build a sustainable business, and I found this opportunity. I want to use it. This was what my answer was. But he kept on asking me, why are you doing this business? Why are you doing this business? Don't tell me that you want to build a sustainable business. Don't tell me that you found an opportunity. He just kept asking me, why are you doing this business? So he was not able to answer that question perfectly. How should an entrepreneur answer this question, sir?
A very good question. I think, see, so I have a personal experience to share here, and it's very hilarious. So when I was in IIT Kanpur, I was passed out. I had also decided to apply to universities in US for MS. And one of the things that we had to fill up was a statement of purpose. And for the life of me, I could not figure out what would I write in it. My statement of purpose was very clear. I want to do MS. What's so difficult to understand in that? I want to study more. And it took me time to figure out that people take themselves very, very seriously in Western culture. And if they feel that this is not something where their own personal aspirations are aligned with, they will not do that activity. They really value their own time. They will not just go do a course. In India, you will find parents will tell children, you're not getting a job, MBA kar lo. Achha, you've done MBA, you're not getting a job, do XYZ. But that boy probably wants to be a photographer. Why are you forcing him to do MBAs when his personal interest, desire, emotions, feelings are aligned with becoming a photographer? So I think one question all of us should answer is that if money, time were not a constraint, and there was no parental pressure on us, what is it that we'll really be doing in life? What would I be happy doing? That's the personal purpose. And your mentor is really asking you about your personal purpose. He's not asking you about your business purpose. You're talking about business purpose. You're not talking about your personal purpose. For example, personally for me, I'm really concerned that SME sector in India has not grown. It contributes just 17% to Indian economy. German SME sector contributes 65%. And I know for a fact that SME sector actually is the growth engine for any country. So personally, I would like to do whatever it takes to help improve the SME sector. And it is my belief that today's startups are future SMEs of India. So this is my personal purpose. And I shared business purpose right up front at the beginning of this presentation. So therefore, defining your own purpose, why are you doing what you're doing, and defining your organization's purpose becomes extremely critical. It is what will keep you focused. Does it answer your question?
Yes, it answers the question, but I have another question. Can I ask it, sir? But
Sure.
fine.
Sure.
So what is the question is that? So I am just saying a purpose that relates with the business. That relates with it. It makes look like I would need to do the business because I am facing this concern. But what my question is that would it create an image from the investor that I'm just telling this purpose so that they would accept me to do the business? Would it? My question is that would it create an image with the investors? Because I'm just telling a purpose that would that would look like I am very concerned about this market. I just want to do some good in this market. Would it create such an image with the investors?
I understand. So I'm going to ask you a very different question, and I'm sorry, it is a little personal, but it's not intended to be personal, right? Suppose you're interested in marrying some woman, some girl, and you know that she's looking for a certain profile. So she says, I'm only going to marry somebody who's going to immigrate to US. You don't want to go to US, you want to stay in India, but you tell her, no, you know what? I am all committed. I will want to go to US. In fact, once we get married, I will start that activity. What is going to happen to that relationship once you get married?
It will be a little troublesome, sir.
The same thing is going to happen to your business. Even this is a marriage. You're marrying the investor, you're marrying your business. It's a relationship that you will have to build and maintain. So don't see. So when you tell a story to an investor, you're really telling a story to yourself. And there'll be a day of reckoning in the future, which you will not like. You would have wasted time, money, your energies, and you'd be very, very depressed and despondent. So stay true to yourself. Do only what you really, really want to do. That, you know what, you don't want to live another day without doing that. There are so many of us who keep saying, I want to become a writer, I want to become a painter, I want to travel. But if you're not actually getting up in the morning and starting to write or starting to paint, then you have to question yourself whether you're really serious about it. There is a huge difference between what we desire and what we really want. Okay, guys, enough questions. We'll have to now get back to the topic, and we'll again have questions towards the end. Okay, guys, moving on. I want to quickly now look at how will your risks and valuation change. So here's the thing. Initially, the risks are very high. What you see up here is the risk line, and at the bottom, you see the valuation. So during the idea to opportunity stage, your valuation is 0 and your risk is infinite, unless you have experience in building companies. When you start doing, can somebody has not got his mic on mute? Can you please go on mute?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. Then when you actually start doing customer development with your POC, with whatever little prototype you made or MVP you made, and you start finding customers who are ready to, work with you, your valuation goes a little up and your risk comes down a little. And valuation will keep going up slowly if you keep finding more and more customers who are ready to work with you. Once you have successfully crossed, so you may have a target. So your angel investor may tell you, hey, if you get 10 customers, 10 successful customers like this, I will give you money. Or he may say, if you have 10,000 online users, I'll give you money. So when that happens, the risk goes down a little more and your valuation goes up a little more, and you start building the product now till you get to a stage where product market fit is achieved, right? And again, you get a step up. Now you're discovering business model, and you discover the business model. Your risk has gone down, your valuation has gone up. You have a successful go-to-market strategy. Again, it changes. This is where probably angel funding will happen. And your valuation goes out of the roof. So notice the risk slows down, but valuation accelerates. Here, the risk going down is slow, valuation is slow, but then it starts accelerating as you keep crossing milestones. This is how you must view the risk, and you must factor that into your funding strategy plan. So achieving milestones is the key. That is what will get you to the next stage of investment. And let's start looking at the milestones part of it. But before we do that, let's figure out, see from investors' perspective, he would also like to see how are you mitigating risks. So you can start identifying specific risks. It could be a technology risk. Have a plan. So for example, you set up a team, but you don't have a CTO. And it is very clear that you will need a CTO. And you don't have a plan for it. The investor is going to walk away. Or it could be a team capability risk. You don't have a good sales marketing team in place. Or it could be market accessibility. Yeah, market hai, but you don't have a method of accessing it. Market competitiveness, or market timing, or funds to ensure venture success. You have these risks. Another big risk is fear of dilution. An entrepreneur has a huge fear of dilution. My advice to you is don't fear dilution, but don't be adventurous with dilution just because you want quick valuation. Getting early quick valuation, large valuation is not a good thing. And then execution capability. You have a great idea, you built a great product, but you're unable to execute, right? So that's a risk you have to assess and have a plan for. It is fantastic if you can have a risk matrix and say, hey, investor, I've assessed these risks. I understand this is the challenge. With the money you're giving me, this is how I'm going to address it. So he sees that you've looked at all aspects of business, and that really reassures him. What are the fundamental mitigation strategies that you'll have to use? So either raise enough cash to match the milestones. It is always about milestones. or match your milestones to available cash. There is nothing outside this. You will have to adopt one of the two strategies depending on how much money is available to you and when it is going to be available to you. So the best strategy here is to do one of the two following. Reduce your burn rate to allow you to complete the milestone before you run out of cash. Or target an intermediate milestone. So I told you there are 4 key milestones, but there are intermediate milestones also. Get into a negotiation with the investor and see if he is willing to allow you getting in more funds on an intermediate milestone, but always as an up round. Never go for a down round. And you won't have to go for down round if you have a robust financial plan and an operations plan in place. The other thing you need to do is, if you have an investor on board, start validating your milestone. Use him. Always go for an investor who has had experience with other startups. Don't take an HNI who has no experience but has money. He'll be a pain for you. He'll be an albatross around your neck. Go discuss valuation targets with him. Go discuss valuation strategy, your milestones. Leverage him to help you. And your total focus has to be on milestones. That is what we will keep getting you funds. Everything else is waste of time. If an investor believes in you and you are hitting the milestones, you'll get the money. Avoid a down round at all costs. Nothing shakes investor confidence, your current investors and future investors, by going for a down round. The second most important milestone is the customer traction. And there are various intermediate milestones that will help you reduce the risk, which tell you, okay, yes, my risk is getting reduced. So you got wireframe mockups of application in the initial stages, demonstrated to a significant number of customers, and they're willing to talk to your investors, saying, you know what, especially B2B, they're willing to talk to your investors and say, hey, we are ready to buy this if and when the product ships. They could actually give you letter of intent that yes, we like what we have seen and we will buy this product at X price from you as and when you are ready. Will go a great way to build customer confidence. If you have already shipped beta version to customers, again a milestone for raising money. Customer has beta tested and reported success, milestone for raising money. Even if you're not getting money up front, these can all become intermediate milestones for raising funds. If you're a B2C, large number of free users and their engagement with the product is high. They have signed off, they signed in, they have downloaded, they have logged in, they're logging at least once or twice a week, and there are no uninstalls, or very little uninstalls. Typically in a B2C market, if you have anything between 5 to 10% net user growth per month at this stage, and you have less than 1 to 3% uninstalls, you're in the good zone. 5% is a little dicey, but 10% is really very good if you're adding 10% customers every month. Initially, you'll have to accelerate. You can't do 10% for initial months. You have to get to that number of 10,000 as quickly as possible, and then at least add 10% every month. You're adding 1,000 customers every month. So in the initial stages, that will give confidence to the customer, to the investors. This is your customer dev product market fit stage. Paying customers, very important, because that builds investor confidence that yes, there are customers who will pay for this. B2B, they have actually deployed it into production. Again, very, very strong indicator. Reordering is happening and recommendation is happening. You have net promoters in your customer base. Again, a very, very strong intermediate milestone which you can use for funding. So you have various options. Don't get stuck with the 4 major milestones. You can use any intermediate milestone. It's all about negotiating. So let's say you are at customer dev stage and you say, hey, my wireframes is ready and I'm going to go out. I've met these 10 people. He says, and the investor says, hey, no, not wireframe. But if you come back with beta tested versions and customer says, yes, successful, I'll fund you. Different investors will find different level of comfort. And you will have to do this thinking. Now, Rahul, to your question, what will drive traction? How do you compete in highly competitive markets? So first of all, the question you have to answer is, will your product be critical for the customer? And even if it's a crowded market, you can always find niche opportunities by some tweak, doing something different so that the product becomes interesting for the customer. So when you do the job analysis, you may find, and I have seen this so many times, that you may find, so for example, take Oyo. Oyo works for a certain category of customers, and the actually in-room experience is very poor, especially if the room is below $1,000. And now that's a niche. And there's a latent critical need out there to service, to give better quality rooms in that price range. So in a crowded market also, you can find an opportunity if you examine your competition. And the way to do this is, this is something we cover in detail in our growth hacking workshop. But, and those of you who are interested, it's there on the YouTube. You can go see the recording. So you can start writing on Twitter, writing on various social channels, and find out what are customers talking about a particular competitor. And what are they trying to solve when that's not getting solved? Just that one study, spend a couple of months doing that, you will know exactly where the niche is. And you can fight off the big competitors. Again, look for an unworkable problem to solve in that niche also. And invariably what happens, it takes time for a large customer to pivot and start blocking you off. But it can give you enough time, enough play to get an entry. If you're getting into automating a task in a highly competitive market, get out. Not going to succeed. Change the problem. Then the other thing is, in a large market, in a competitive, how do you plan to compete? What will your pricing strategy be? So are you going to compete with the incumbents? Sure, but then we have to figure out, where will the differentiation come from? The differentiation can come from operations efficiency. The differentiation could come from really high quality customer relationship, very, very responsive customer relationship. And just to give you an example, before COVID, all my travel was on Vistara. I would not travel with other airlines simply because of one reason: amazing customer service. Amazing customer service. If I called the call center, I had somebody who very articulate, who responded, who could actually have a conversation and understand and help out. Whereas most companies really compromise on customer relationship management, and they put, because see, they see cost. They don't see added value that can be generated because of having really high quality people handling your customer relationship. So there are a lot of plays which you can bring in. Very interesting part, Rakesh, for you to study is, and I can separately send you that data. The steel industry was completely knocked off its feet in US, the large steel plants, by mini steel plants, by following. So typically steel industry has 5 business lines where they compete, and the lowest is torsion bar, what is used in construction. So mini steel plants came in, they just focused on the lowest segment, where the operating margins for large players were just 8%. And the mini steel plants found that, they could actually operate at 5% lesser price at 20% gross. And they completely killed the torsion bar market for large players. So you will have to get into those kind of depths to figure out, how do you really position yourself in a highly competitive market. The other thing is, enter bottom of the market. Best example, how Toyota entered in 1970s in the car segment in US. Enough studies on it online, you can just study it. Or compete with non-consumption. Go to areas where it's not being consumed. Flipkart did that to online books in India. Meesho did that to online e-commerce for tier 2, tier 3 cities. Go to areas where you know that service can be sold, but it's not being consumed. So find out those niches. The other thing is, how differentiated is your value proposition? That should be crystal clear to you. And this is a value proposition framework we use. My sincere advice to you is, please print it out. Take a photograph, print it out. If you consistently define your value proposition using this framework, you will not go wrong. So how does this work? Really, my value proposition, what is the value? Please write it down. What is the value is going to get? Is for target customers. Define your market segment very clearly. If this is the market segment I'm going to operate in, who are dissatisfied with current alternative, examine your competition. Who am I going to compete with? Our product / service provides key problem solving capability. What problem will you solve for the customer? By what does the product actually do to solve that problem? That unlike the current product order, how is it better? If you can get this down really sharply, you will know exactly what to do. Okay, so that quickly covers how do you compete. Rahul, I hope that answers your question. We can always get into one-on-one conversation if you need more clarity. It's also important now to see how will your funding strategy depend on your startup journey. And I showed you that journey in the 5 Cousins framework. But really the fundamental framework that this is based on is also known as innovation diffusion curve, technology diffusion curve, designed by Dr. Rogers in 60s. After studying how new potato seeds would be absorbed by, would be accepted by American farmers. What this framework really says is initially innovators will buy your product for sheer novelty. It will be followed by early adopters who will buy it for competitive advantage. And then followed by early conservatives who will buy it for benefits. And then followed by late conservatives for ease of use. And then laggards, because everybody else has bought, so they also buy. Interesting part is that, actually, let me take you there. This is how your sales will grow. The interesting part is that your marketing strategy will really depend on, and your funding strategy will really depend on at what stage are you. There's a fantastic book written on this called Crossing the Chasm by a gentleman called Jeffrey Moore. Please pick it up and read it. It'll give you a lot of clarity. A lot of what we do in Bulletproof Your Startup came from this learning. So you'll initially have what we call technology enthusiast. I just want to make one more point. Any purchase that happens, it will happen only for one of the 3 reasons or combination. People buy for novelty, they buy it for competitive advantage, or they buy for benefit or combination thereof. There is no other reason why people buy anything. And you have to be crystal clear that the current customer set that you're dealing with, what is he buying it for? Because that will give you much better growth rate with your customers. And what this framework says is that the biggest challenge is moving from that 13.5% market to the main market, which is actually 68%. And this gap is huge. A lot of startups fail here. So this is your early market. If you're just starting, this is what you really have to plan for. And this is your mainstream market. This will come much later. It will come probably 1 year down the road. Unfortunately, what happens is most entrepreneurs are actually looking at the main market. That is your serviceable, addressable market. Whereas you need to look for, from funding perspective, you need to look at your first set of customers who will buy for novelty. And the moment you change this perspective, the amount of funds you require drop drastically. You'll not create huge Facebook campaigns. You'll figure out a much better way to reaching out to these people. And once you've done that, then you follow up and reach out to visionaries who are going to buy for competitive advantage. Your marketing messaging, marketing strategy, communication strategy will change. And after you've done that, then and only then, that is, you have reached product market fit and you just about started discovering your business model, then you should attempt to go to the main market. This will really optimize fund planning and requirements for you if you do this step by step. So forget the main market initially. I'm not saying lose sight of it. Forget it initially for initial fundraise. Because here you're really doing customer development. And our advice to founders is forget spending money on media, pick up your bag and go meet people. If you're doing B2C and you live in an apartment block, talk to your apartment block people. Talk to your friends. Go out on your network and talk to your network. But don't spend money on marketing. because you still are trying to figure out what is the right product. You'll waste money at this stage and you'll ask for more and more funds. So your sales focus, when should it really start? It starts at ideation, prototyping, and technology creation stage. Go to your friends at this stage. Go meet potential customers. Go find out. If you are B2B, maybe some customer will come at, hey, if you do this successfully, I will buy your product. You can get a letter of intent out of it. These are various strategies, tactics for reducing your fund requirement. So focus on doing this right before you even spend a single rupee. And after that, you start looking at being really market focused, and your product development should be driven by what you're seeing in the market, not necessarily directed by the market, but what you're seeing in the market, and you devise the roadmap, product roadmap, according to what you think will get you traction based on what you heard in the market. Again, this will optimize your funds. This is where your first 100 customers are coming from, B2B. This is where your first 10,000 customers are coming from, B2C. And that later on is growth and scale. So forget it for the time being, if you're in early stage. The next thing which will help you really optimize your funds is having a really robust growth strategy in place, also known as growth hacking. You need to have an ideas as a team. If you're 3 guys, sit down and start generating ideas and spend minuscule amount of money. We do this as a regular practice in Bulletproof Your Startup. You'll be surprised at we spend the smallest amount of money on paid advertising. And typically our webinars have close to 150 to 200 registrations, and typically anything between 40 to 60 participants. And you can do this if you sit down and start applying yourself, and there are so much available on the net as to how do you do growth hacking. So analyze, prioritize, select 2 or 3 ideas to test and pick up whichever is the best and work on it. Start with the best sounding idea, create a success hypothesis, set your goals and check if it worked. Measure outcomes, very important. Keep measuring outcomes. And do analytics, figure out gains, figure out insights, validate your hypothesis, modify goals, go back to team, and this has to become a daily practice for you if you really want to minimize your marketing costs and therefore your need for funds. Have very standard KPIs, guys. This is KPIs, specific KPIs for startups as defined in Balanced Scorecard. And basically attraction KPIs, engagement KPIs, value KPIs, retention KPIs. We'll be happy to send this framework to you guys if you write back to us and you can see what to do with it. And then there are additional KPIs and metrics. The point that we are making here is, guys, metrics really matter. This will help you figure out, are you going to hit your milestones or not? And this is what will give investor confidence. So this should be key part of your funding strategy, measuring from day one. Now, so we've covered first 2 stages, right? First milestone was that whole customer dev stage. Then second is that customer traction. Third is repeatable, scalable model. How do you make sure that you've got a repeatable, scalable model in place now? So value proposition, generating traction. You are actually getting traction, and that would have got established in second milestone. And is it accelerating? That's what you have to see. Your customer segments are clearly defined. Your penetration strategy is clearly defined. Again, it optimizes your costs. Your customer relationship management is implemented, leading to high customer satisfaction. As a conscious activity, you have to plan for money for this. Your distribution channels are established. Revenue streams are established. Cost structures are established and under control. This is where, if you don't have cost structures in place, you'll not be able to reduce your burn rate if you need to. Key activities of the org in place. What are the key activities you're going to do? And you have systems and processes in place to support that. Your key resources are in position, because if they are not in position, the investor will see it very quickly. He sees you need a CTO and you don't have a CTO, he's not going to put money. and your key relationship with partners and everybody else are established. If all this has happened, the repeatability and scalability of your model will be visible, and it will be actually giving you results. The fourth most important milestone is scaling stage. What are the typical intermediate milestones that will help you get funded? You hired a great CEO with a proven track record, and at this time you actually got decently funded. You're probably funded at least $1 million. Hiring a strong management team has happened. Great indicator. So, or you have a CEO you have discussed with, and he's ready to join if you get VC funding, and he gives you a confirmation that, okay, if you get a VC in conversation, I will also step into conversation. So VCs get confidence. You have already identified a great CEO to come in. If you are the great CEO, great, they will have confidence in you. But my advice to you is that you must do that introspection, that are you the right CEO? If you're not, please get the right CEO to run the organization. Hire a strong management team if you have the money. They will drive your growth. Reach profitability, extremely important. Operations profitability should have been achieved. You should need money only for growth. You're on your way to becoming a clear market leader. It's visible. It may not have happened, but it's visible. And you can give data metrics to support that claim. Again, this becomes a milestone. Have you thought about exit strategies? You need to think about this. Investors expect startups to cover the exit strategy. You need to tell the investor, hey, you know what? The similar companies in the similar markets have been able to exit via selling out to a larger company, or whichever way, larger company, next investor. And what is the multiple that they got? Mention recent exits if you can, if you have information about that. Talk about multiple. That, hey, company X exited, similar company exited after 3 years of operation. They had this much fund. They got 10x valuation. The investors actually got this kind of return. Build his confidence. My experience is very, very small, minuscule percentage of startup entrepreneurs actually think about exit strategy. They are not investor focused. They are not thankful to the investor that he took chance on them and invested. Investor is there only to multiply his money. It is your obligation to give him a multiple. And that has to come into your day-to-day thinking. He's not a convenience store where you got money. He's somebody you're committing to give a multiple to. And that's a huge shift for most entrepreneurs. Or it could be exit for money. Even you can say, yeah, 3 saal mein mujhko, I'm going to exit for money. That whole initial conversation, are you in there to build wealth, or are you in there to build a sustainable organization which you will run? Let's come to when should you really raise funds. So this is how your sales are growing, and you will see there are 4 key stages: prototype, pivot, product, build the business model, start growing, and then scaling. This is how your P&L is going to behave. It's going to be negative. So this is how your investments will behave. You keep getting money periodically, and you'll have bumps in between. And this is what's going to happen to risk. Typically, what we suggest to entrepreneurs: bootstrap do crowdfunding, do bootstrap, go to friends and families till you discover the business model. You started discovering the business model, started getting established. But if you don't have that financial roadmap, financial runway, okay, then you can go to angel funding when you have actually got some paying customers, or you've got users who are sticky, depending on whether it's B2C or B2B. And then you can actually look for angel funding once your business model is discovered, and VC funding when your business model is discovered and you're now growing. So typically this is the timeline, and what I'm showing you is extremely aggressive timeline. This whole 22 months is probably going to be 2 to 3 years journey. Our experience is that most successful startups start getting serious VC funding only in 3rd year. When should you raise funds? When you have the right metrics in place. It could be anything: number of customers acquired per month, transactions per, whatever is relevant for your business. So bootstrap till you have a demonstratable prototype and customers have bought it. Angel fund when you have initial customer interest and who have asked for a pilot. This is the minimum condition. Seed fund when you have successful pilots under your belt and need now to reach a mature business model. and venture capital when you actually discovered your business model and now you want to grow. These are very general guidelines for you. It will really depend on your specific startup, but largely this is what you should keep in mind. Next, figuring out the enterprise value. How do you figure out the enterprise value? So typically startups don't know how to do this. They have no clue. So they get into conversations with angel investors, and that keeps going back and forth because of multiple reasons. I mean, the challenge really is that there are a number of things, if you're clear about, you'll be able to specify that this is the kind of multiple I should ask for. This is the kind of valuation I should ask for. What is your identity? The initial question, for what purpose is the business set up? What are you trying to do? What problem are you solving? How are you helping the customer? What is the market validation? What is the market saying about you? What is the product and features? How do you plan to? There's so many questions that you should be ready with to figure out what is your valuation? How much can you ask for? And if you're not prepared on this, you'll not be able to negotiate a good valuation in the initial rounds. And these are just set of questions. You'll have your own set of questions. And my purpose here is really to focus you on the fact that you will have to answer a set of questions before you can actually arrive at a conclusion that I would like to value my company at X, so that you can have a meaningful conversation with the investor and you can prove to him why you're asking for this. But usually what happens is that entrepreneur, he's thinking of this. In terms of investment, he's wanting most of the cake. In terms of equity, he's wanting to give him a small slice. And this is what the investor is saying. Most of the equity, but small investment. And there's nothing wrong with it. They have different purposes. So it is never going to work unless there is an attempt to align with each other, that it is a marriage. It is not an arm's length relationship. This goes to that initial question of, should you actually just cook up a purpose to get in an investor? It's bound to fail. So there are various valuation methods you can use. And the one which will make most sense for you initially is similar companies model. You see that here in red. And once you have established, you are now looking for VC funding, it will actually be this DCF, net income, real options, it will go here. So given that similar companies model, then you have three large high-level methods. You can have a fair market value, you can have a strategic value, you can have an intrinsic value. Let me give you an example of this. Fair market value is similar companies comparison. Strategic value is WhatsApp had a strategic value for Facebook because their own messenger was not getting traction and they realized that WhatsApp has become far larger. So there was a strategic value in acquiring WhatsApp. Intrinsic value, that somebody's built something that is intrinsically important for me. Tabzo is an example. Tabzo was a company which had built a single app for multiple logins, great technology, great team, but they could not figure out a revenue model. That is, business model, scalable and repeatable business model was not figured out. And finally, they were acqui-hired by Amazon because they found a great technical team and technology which Amazon could use. Intrinsic value. There are a lot of small teams who are working in data science space, machine intelligence space, and they, let us say somebody specialized in supply chain in a specific industry, and he realizes that there is this algorithm he can build, modeling algorithm he can build, which is of use to X number of vendors, software vendors. So a small team of 2-3 people quickly build that algorithm, prove it, and then go to one of these larger companies and say, hey, do you want to acquire this model? And maybe they spent a few $100,000 in building it, but they get $5 million to $10 million for selling that algorithm to another company because there's an intrinsic value for them. Those companies realize that, okay, if we buy this algorithm, we will get additional sale of this much. So why build it ourselves and take another 12 to 18 months if I can start generating revenue today? Intrinsic value. What are the fair market value options? You have multiple methods. You can say, okay, you can tell the investor, hey, if you do this on your own, you get another team. This is the cost in terms of time and money. And I'm already giving you a heads up. of 1 year or whatever the timeline is. So therefore, I want this value. This can be worked out. Or you can take a market multiple approach, looking at what similar companies have recently been acquired for. Or you can take development stage of approach. You can say, look, I'm at this particular stage of my journey, and I believe that it should be worth this much for this stage, especially since I've proven that I've achieved these milestones. This is another method. And then finally, there's a discounted cash flow approach, but this will work only after you have discovered your business model and you work for about a year or so that you have enough revenue data available and your burn rate data available, which will help establish value. So how do you estimate intrinsic value worth of your startup? Experience of the founding team. Nature of innovation your startup is creating. We did that initially. We examined it. Find opportunities where incumbents do not exist or cannot go, which is that, go to markets where there is no consumption happening. Compete with non-consumption. Leverage disrupting strategies to compete with. You can start putting value to each of these. Latent, what is the nature of need? Do you have a differentiated value proposition? Have you established product market fit? Are you creating a disruptive business model? Will your revenue model generate life cycle value? Life cycle value means you can keep getting repeat business from the same customer again and again, and he's there. It's like if you've gone for hosting service with GoDaddy, it's unlikely you'll shift to another hosting service easily. You'll keep renewing your subscription every year. If you're a Microsoft Office user, it's unlikely you will shift from Office to Zoho because the cost of switching is too high. So here are some very simple frameworks we have made where you can start giving a score to each of these. And these are only examples. If you have a list of attributes, you can create an Excel sheet for each of those attributes to figure out what is the intrinsic worth of that attribute for you. So for example, how do you assess founding team? So here are some parameters: experience, domain relevance, working together as a team, and you start giving it a score on 1 to 10. And you figure out, okay, what is the relative weight of these? So you can start giving a weight. By multiplying these two and finally dividing it by total weight will give you overall score. It will be a reality check for you also. Because you may be thinking you got a great founding team and you realize, no, because we are weak on these 5 parameters, and therefore you'll identify risks. And you'll know, okay, what you need to fix, but you will give yourself a low score and make sure that you don't, when you have the conversation with the investor and he finds the same risks, you tell him, yes, we have figured this out and this is our mitigation strategy. Similarly, you can create a market attractiveness matrix. So are you in the bottom of the market? Yes, then 10, give yourself a score of 10 and weight of 10. Are you doing disruptive innovation? No, you're doing sustaining or efficiency. Okay, you give yourself a score of 5 with a weight of 10, overall score becomes. So you can create these kind of tools which will actually help you get a sense of what is the intrinsic strength of your company. Finally, the tool. Now, this is a tool where you can actually figure out investment sizing and timelines. And I'm only going to explain the various components here so that you understand how to use it. The rows in the blue are your accounts and finance expenses, the revenue, general expense, founder salaries, etc., etc. And it comes to overall cumulative fund requirement here. And this has been done for about 36 months. I am showing only 17 months here. Then what are your funding requirements and what will be the sources? So here you said month 1, 10 lakhs put by the founders. Then month 7, you got 30 lakhs from friends and families. Then bank, you raised 20 lakhs in 11th month. And finally, 50 lakhs from angel fund. So this gives you overall fund requirement. It also gives you, depending on how much equity you're farming out, it also gives you, so what you're doing is you're figuring out your revenue rate growth. You see, okay, it's going 50%, 50%. The healthy revenue run rate, it becomes a way of discussing with the investor. And you start arriving at a valuation. So you are valuing yourself at 1 crore. And then again, when initially you valued yourself at 1 crore, then when you got your friends and families, you valued yourself at 200. These red columns that you see are different when the valuation changed. Then when you got banks, valuation will not change because it's a debt. Then you raised 50 lakh and you decided to give 10% to him. And your valuation therefore became 5 crores. And your revenue rate has started stabilizing at between 10 to 20%. But the most interesting part that you have to see, because of all this, how is equity holding changing? So you had founders, friends and family, employee ESOPs, angel fund, seed fund, VC Series A, total equity distribution. So you find that by the time you started with 100%, by the time you take angel funding, and you have kept, let's say, 10% initially for employees, you're down to 64%. Your friends or family are sitting at 17%. Angel fund is at 10%. And you will find that by the time you get VC funding, you're sitting at 44%. So if you are 3 founders, and that is what we recommend. So on an average, you got 15% each. But if you're valued at 50, let's say 100 crores, when you got VC funding, then 15% is not bad. You made 15 crores in something like 2 to 3 years time. So this is how you actually will need to look at how are you going to plan your funding? What are you going to do? And this tool will really help you figure out. So what it will help you do is, depending on what your goals are, it will help you figure out when should you raise how much money. But it assumes that you have really figured out these blue rows, your accounts and finance costs. What are the various heads and what are you going to be spending month on month? This will come from your financial plan. Okay, so this is the tool slide that I wanted to share with you. Finally, just to sum it up for you, how do you engage with us? All of you have a free coach hour offer now. You can just set it up with us. Sudeep will be sharing the links for you in the chat to use to book a free coach hour with us. Then we have workshops every Saturday, same time. You can, you will be on our mailing list, so you will get mails from us. Please make sure that you mark us as not spam, because our experience with Gmail is it goes into a promotions folder or it goes into spam, and a lot of our participants miss out on our further announcements. And if you want a WhatsApp message, then please make sure that the phone number that you have entered in your at the time of registration is correctly entered. Then you have coach insight options, which are quick interventions. You have strategy design options, which are actually 2 to 3 months engagement to help you cross a big issue. And then deep coaching. And we are giving you a free offer for joining the BYS community, where a lot of partnerships and service partners availability is going to happen. Right now, we are keeping it free for all our participants, but it will become a priced product shortly. So that's it. And I can again take questions at this stage, if any. Sudeep, can you help me with that?
Yeah, there are quite a few questions now. The first one comes from Rajat. If someone is creating some disruption in the market where there are some existing funded competitors, how do we exactly target the audience as being a startup? We'll be having less funds than your competitors. And also the competitors start targeting the same strategies. So how can we work in that situation to keep our idea as a market leader?
Okay.
Rajat, you want to come on?
Good idea.
Rajat?
Okay, let me quickly answer that, because so here's the thing. So it's a journey, right? So first of all, if you've done the jobs to be done analysis correctly, and if you're really disrupting in a market where there is a crowded market, clearly you're doing something they're not doing. And you will be able to demonstrate that to your initial investors. My advice to any startup who's getting into solving a latent critical need is to stay under the radar till he has actually discovered his business model. Don't start publishing, don't start going too big. If you're B2B, it's very easy to keep it under the radar. If you're B2C, you can still choose to reduce your visible marketing and and actually make it growth hacking where you're reaching your audience very, very quietly. And once you reached a certain stage, then it will be visible to investors that you are onto something big because your growth metrics will be showing it. That's the when you raise really big money and go blitzkrieg with your publicity and gain market share. The thing that's going to happen is that large players will take time to respond because since it's a gap in their market, in their offering, they will not have systems and processes in place to deal with the change. So by the time and for large organizations to turn around is like a big tanker turning around, right? They're going to take time. And in that window, you will get enough opportunity to create traction, which cannot then be questioned. That's one. Second, you cannot do innovation as a one-stop activity. When you're doing something, you should have at least 4 or 5 innovations thought through in your roadmap. So the moment a competitor tries to copy you on something, go to the next, create differentiation. The moment he copies that, go to next. So you'll always be ahead of him. So at a very high level, this is what I would advise you as a strategy.
Rajat, I'm not sure if you heard the answer, but we have covered your question. Hisham says, how do we solve the problem of market accessibility risk?
Hisham, difficult question to answer generally, but you can take a coach hour with us and we'll help you figure out for you. But typically your growth hacking strategy takes care of this. And there are ways of hacking this. So the next.
Okay. The next question is from Praveen. Praveen says, at the initial level, how to get a good CEO and management team?
Initial level? I mean, please define initial level.
Praveen? Maybe we'll take the next question from Praveen. He has
just to answer that, you are looking at a CEO only once you've crossed your business model discovery, you've done your go-to-marketing strategy, and then you're trying to scale. That's the time you're going to look for CEO. It can't be initial. If it's initial, then he's one of the founders.
He has a second question. How does it work in life science research-based startup who don't have revenue for 2 to 3 years?
Very interesting. Very interesting. The way to do is go with basically accelerators and incubator cells. There are enough life sciences incubation cells getting set up, especially in the IITs and the 30 odd IITs that we have now. And that's your best bet because that's where you're also going to get deep technical support and a lot of money. I've seen companies who are in life sciences research or biotech research getting close to 40-50 lakhs funding. And you can actually go to multiple incubators, go to one, complete, raise maybe 20 lakhs from them, reach a certain activity, go to another incubator after that. So till such time your 2-3 years are over, your product is matured. I've seen it work very well for people who are also doing PhDs or MTechs and the MSs in the same colleges where the incubation centers are established. So I don't know what your personal status is, but those are opportunities. I do know for a fact that there are some such life sciences startup working in IIIT in Bangalore.
Okay, can we move?
Yep.
Short on time. Mangwesh has a question. I'm trying to put in place hyperlocal logistics support for a food application. Do you know what channels I can explore?
Very interesting. Very interesting. It'll depend on who has the kitchen. Is he also owning the kitchen, or he's going to actually enlist multiple restaurants and work with that? I don't know what he's going to do, but a good way to work would actually learn the business could be to become a partner with Dunzo, just to be the delivery partner first. Understand the business, get into the market, and then as your delivery team matures, you would know enough about the customer market. And then you can start figuring out, okay, how do you start your own?
Yeah, Mangesh, can you come on mic?
Yeah. So I was actually asking this question after considering Dunzo. because the pricing model that Dunzo offers is something like 15 rupees for first 3 kilometers, and then it is 15 rupees per kilometer. So it's pretty expensive, for the business that we run. I was trying to explore other options, if you know what channels I can approach, or
Got it. So you're already in operation. That's what I understand.
Yeah, on a very small scale right now.
Got it. Is the kitchen your own, or you are actually an aggregator?
I'm an aggregator.
Okay, interesting. These are housewives, home cooks, or are these restaurants?
These are mostly home chefs.
Okay. Okay. Is there a particular cuisine focus?
No, right now it's like each home chef has its own specialty, and we try to tap into that segment.
Understood. Got it. I think that's your first problem. You're too widespread. You're going to be challenged in terms of costs, because your customer acquisition cost, unless it goes down if you have a very sharp focus. So for example, somebody does just Punjabi food, somebody does just Bengali food, and then picking the markets becomes that much more simple. And there are ways of entering ethnic community markets. So you'll have to think that part through, because otherwise you're spreading yourself far too wide, and it's going to become expensive and difficult for you to capture market. But Mangesh, what you should do is take a free coach hour, and we can go into a little more detail with you and help you figure this out.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks.
We have another question from, I think that's it about the questions. This is another follow-up question from Praveen. Not a question, his response. Shri has a question. In the interest of having a longer runway through bootstrapping, is it a good idea to continue in a corporate job while working on a startup?
Sri, actually it will need a little deeper examination, because see, you are at the customer dev stage. You're still developing customers, so you will need somebody who's front-ending you in conversation with customers. So I'm assuming you're B2B. If you're not B2B, then the game changes. It's done differently. And I would think of taking a partner who can front-end you till you start seeing customer traction. You start seeing that the curve is growing up, and that's the time to quit. Otherwise, till such time your MVP is not clearly established, it may be a good idea to continue in a job and keep doing this as a side activity. But you'll have to figure out how will you reach out to customers.
Okay, I think for the questions, that is all, Ravi sir. I have typed the form that you can quickly submit, just 5 details about yourself in case you want to get in touch for a one-on-one quick consultation with the Bulletproof Your Startup team. If somebody can acknowledge, if you can see the link on the group chat. All right, perfect, thanks. So that's a link which will also be shared to you via emails. You'll receive it in your mailbox in some time. And I think, Ravi sir, we are running a bit late. We are running about 15 minutes late. So if nobody has any other questions, we can stop. Or if there's a last question, we can take. Rahul, why don't you come on mic and talk about what you're typed?
Hello everyone. I do not have a question, but I just wanted to say, had I not been here, I would have wasted my Saturday today sitting at home doing some XYZ things. I would like to thank you, the team of BYS, for sharing a lot of information that I otherwise would have not known. Well done. Now I have a better clarity of what I want to do actually. So thank you so much.
Well, that's so good to hear, and thank you so much for appreciating what we do for you. And do go online and like us. It'll help to spread the message.
Surely.
Good, Sen. So we stop here, and I have another meeting happening at 12:30 that I need to get into. So, guys, have a great weekend, and we're always there to help you. Do reach out to us if you need any kind of help. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.